All right.
We didn't
So,
listen to the next one.
no, that's because the sound isn't working in here. I'm
Dang.
terribly sorry. Yes. We're going to rock the political institutions here. So we talked about the political history there, and we found that after that period of nice, solid economic growth with those handovers of power, one very critical thing about those handovers of power is that they were happening between parties, right? You had that very tumultuous 1990s period where it was, is the military going to intervene? Well, the economy kind of took off, and the PT was able to make some strategic alliances here. But then the handoff was between parties, really. And then there was the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff after Operation Car Wash happened. Then Jair Bolsonaro came to power. And the transition of power was not clean. And so, again, we talked about Huntington in the book. Roskin points to Huntington who says, we've got to see multiple clean transfers of power here. With Brazil, I do not know whether or not we can safely rule out some kind of extra-constitutional occurrence happening in the future. So let's talk about the parties here. So I'm just going to first introduce them. Brazil's parties were historically rather weak. The PT was the strong, mass-based party, and when Lula, oh sorry, I was just looking this up. It was Romania. It was Romania that had canceled the election after the populist right winger looked like he was going to win. So I couldn't remember if it was Romania or Bulgaria, but say it, do it. Can you criticize? Sure, okay. Parties in Brazil tended historically to be very weak and personalistic vehicles. The Workers' Party, the PT, right there, that was kind of the exception. It was based around Lula. I'm just going to call him Lula. Really, and that's him right there, Lula da Silva. The party had a lot of grassroots support. It had strategic alliances all over the place. It was a very firm, strong party. What's happened over the last 10, 12 years is you've started to see more of a two-party thing going on here. Because you have coalition going. So you can see here, it's multi-party, right? We can see this. There's lots of parties who are scoring seats in the lower house. So what we have here is the lower house. Remember, it's bicameral system here. We have a bicameral system, bicameral legislature in Brazil. And then we have the lower house, Chamber of Deputies. In the upper house, which is the Senate. So, as you can see here, we do have lots of nice splashy color here, right? You can tell just by looking at it right away, just like in the case of France, we very clearly have a multi-party system. Multi-party. So we have a bicameral legislature and a multi-party system. And of course, these elections are conducted, I'll get that in a second. I want to finish my point about this. In actual practice, though, what has happened is that they have started to form two solid blocks. One, I'm just going to use the left-right thing, even though I've told you a million times I don't think that's the best way to look at these things. It's fairly common. Here's the center. Over here, you have the PT, who essentially make alliances with everyone over here. Everyone to the left of center supports PT, which is essentially a center-left party. You can also have some center-right groups come over here as well to work with them. This has happened multiple times. These are the people who essentially Lula won over in his first two terms, and who are willing to work with Rousseff. But then you have the Liberal Party, okay? The Liberal Party. Basically, everyone to the right is going to support them. So you have these two bigger parties that are essentially center-left and center-right respectively, and then all these other little parties that are in the government, in order to get anything at all, are going to have to basically choose a side. They're going to have to get in line with either the PT or the LP. Does that make sense? So it is a multi-party system, but they're going to form very, very solid blocks behind these two groups here. So in point of practice, you're going to have all the leftists, no matter what party they're in here, right? The people for the Democratic Labor Party, they're not voting for their own guy for president, right? They're going to vote for whoever the Workers' Party puts up. The Republicans, they're not going to vote for their own guy. They're going to vote for whoever the Liberal Party puts up. Does that make sense? So, at the local level, you might vote for your single-member guy. You might vote for him there. But at the presidential level, if you're on the left, you're voting for this person for president. And if you're on the right, you're voting for this person for president. Because what happens if those on the left defect from the PT and start splitting their vote? What's going to happen? It's going to easily hand the election to the rightists, right? And so if you're a far leftist, you might think that Lula or Rousseff is corrupt and a little bit of a sellout, but they're way better than Bolsonaro, right? It'd be like if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you all know who she is here in America? It'd be like if she looked at Joe Biden and was like, Joe Biden's such a corporatist sellout, I'm going to vote for the Green Party. And it's like, but you wouldn't do that because then that just makes it more likely Donald Trump would win. Does that make sense? It's the same thing that's going on there. So while it's true, in Congress, in the Chamber of Deputies and in the Federal Senate, you do get that wonderful coloration there that tells you immediately you have a multi-party system. But in actual practice, you have these two leading parties who essentially, if you want to think of it as kind of like, I think this is what could ultimately happen. Remember, Brazilian democracy, still very young. Still very young. What could essentially happen is eventually all these smaller parties over here could wind up just getting directly absorbed into the PT, right? And then it could just become like they just become like big tent parties and kind of become like the Democrats and Republicans here in the United States. And actually, when I get to talking about the differences between these two parties and what their platforms are, I think you're probably gonna be like, so like Democrats and Republicans. Yeah.
Do they kind of make alliances like the Germany?
Oh yeah. Yeah, in the legislative chamber, you definitely have to make alliances to get anything done. And there's a lot of gridlock there. And that's why the president is quite powerful in these systems, is in order to break through the logjam of multi-party politics. And it's one of the things in the literature that you find is, multi-party systems, the thing that they tend to get criticized for is governments are super unstable. Remember the French example. They can't get anything done. Remember the French example. It leads to presidents needing to be super strong to like force things through. Think of the French example. It's the same thing here. So let's talk a little bit about the issues that divide them here. On the left here, for the PT, they want to expand the welfare state. LP, they'd like to make cuts. They'd like to deregulate. They want more environmental protection. More guns. More guns. They're very pro Second Amendment. Now, they don't actually have a Second Amendment, but I'm just writing Second Amendment because we're Americans. We know what we're talking about, right? Guns. All right. Pro Second Amendment. Actually, I'll write pro-gun. They're super pro-gun. They believe that the answer to Brazil's incredible crime problem, and Brazil has a homicide rate twice that of Mexico. I'll repeat that. Twice that of Mexico. Which, as I explained last week, is not exactly an idyllic place full of peace and love and happiness. No. So it's incredibly dangerous, and Jair Bolsonaro's answer to that is arm up, lads, ladies, just to go packing some heat. The PT, they support very rigorous gun laws. Support gun laws, which essentially disarms the population. They are really anti anyone other than the police having guns. Of course, the criminals have guns too. let's see. What else should I put down here? Ooh, right here. Basically, empower police. It's a big one because there's these large, huge slums, these favelas, right? And it's where a lot of the crime occurs. And basically, Bolsonaro and his supporters would like to just kind of unleash the police on these areas. And just kind of, how would you say it? Lower the rules of engagement, if you will. They basically want to let the police get super aggressive. Go in there, crack some heads, shoot some people. You know, that's basically their explanation. And has anyone listened to Jair Bolsonaro talk? Okay. He makes Donald Trump sound very polished and urbane and polite. This dude is, yeah. Yeah, people who call him like the Trump of the tropics, like, I honestly think that's very rude to Donald Trump. I feel like Jair Bolsonaro is much ruder and much more crass than Donald Trump. So if you Google like his talks, I mean, he literally will say like, yeah, just go shoot them. Yeah, just go shoot those people. Yeah, he's got all sorts of terrible sound bites like that. Wants tax cuts, wants deregulation. They want to support state ownership. Now, critically, this doesn't mean state ownership of the entire economy. What they want is to keep critical industries that are very wealth generating, things like Petrobras. Remember, in Mexico we had Pemex, that's the state oil company in Mexico. In Brazil it's called Petrobras. This is the cash cow that pays for the programs. And so the left in Brazil wants to keep that under state ownership to essentially be the thing that can fund the welfare programs that they want. And the right is saying, no, we want to deregulate. And when we say deregulate, I should maybe put /privatize. Privatize. So let's take a look at what we have here. What we have here is, hold on, I'm gonna turn that off for a second because I'm gonna keep writing. The left, so the PT and its ideological allies, everyone further to the left, they want to expand the welfare state, more bennies, environmental protection, stop chopping down trees, quit the carbon emissions and stuff, tougher gun laws, that'll clean up crime, state ownership of critical industries, so that's the left. These are some of their primary things. On the right, tax cuts. Deregulate the economy, less regulations, more privatization. They're very pro-gun, and they're very much interested in having a big police crackdown on things like violent crime and drugs. Yes?
I feel like the police crackdown should almost be on the other side. Like, if you're going to be pro-gun, why would you be both pro-gun and...
Because they believe that crime is a social problem. That the problem is not individual criminals, the problem is the society, which is so unfair and unjust and impoverished that it produces the criminals in the first place. So the answer is not having the police go arrest individual people, it's creating a more fair and just society, which will thereby eventually eliminate crime. And so what I'm trying to show you here is that, yes, basically if you want to think of them as the Democrats and them as the Republicans, you're off to a very good start. Because where do they have support? The PT and its allies dominate the urban areas, the urban and coastal areas. Remember, we said the population is concentrated along the coast, the big cities, all along the coast. Urbanization. This is where the PT and its allies are. We're talking about secular people. So ideologically, these are people who are secular. These are people who are, they tend to be university educated. People tend to vote this way. University grads. State employees. state employees. Union workers, union members, union workers. On the other side, which I'm going to erase this for a second here. I'll bring it back up if I need to. Bicameral legislature, 2 houses. I'll have occasion to talk about that again. Multi-party system. Fear not, we'll talk about it again. On the right-hand side here, the Liberal Party, and when he says liberal, when they say liberal, they're talking about classically liberal, right? They're not talking about liberal progressive. They're talking about classical liberal, small c liberal, which meant cut the size of government, give more reign to the free market, more individual liberty. So we're talking like 19th century liberals. They tend to have support in the rural areas, the farming communities, so we have the urban-rural divide, and the farming communities, of course, are like in the interior of the country. I'll just put interior because there I put coastal. So you have the urban coastal on the left, you have the rural interior on the right, and these people tend to be culturally very conservative. He overwhelmingly dominates the Catholic and evangelical vote, especially that rising evangelical vote. He himself is a Catholic, his wife's an evangelical, and actually, if I remember correctly, Bolsonaro was rebaptized as an evangelical a couple of years ago. So he draws very strong support from the Catholics and the evangelicals. The law and order, family values, I should say traditional family values there. Traditional family values. Brazil is an intensely conservative country culturally. Things like gay marriage and drug legalization, that stuff just does not fly among Brazilians. Yeah.
We were looking at his quotes or whatever, and one of them was like, he'd rather his son die in a car accident than come up to his door with another guy.
Yeah, he'd rather his son was dead than gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's got a ton of quotes like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I just found another one that says...
Bring him out, get tasted, because Jair Bolsonaro is a huge player. And I mean, he was president, he may well be president again. Bring him out, bring your favorite Jair Bolsonaro quote.
Let's see, it says, I actually sent it to Megan and I started laughing. It says, I'm not gonna combat or discriminate, but if I see 2 men kissing on the street, you better know I'm gonna hit them.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, he's got tons of quotes like that. And so, really, this is really the kind of split that we have here, and it's, I feel like, very easy to see the kind of, that these are basically the Republicans, these are basically the Democrats. Yes, it's a multi-party system, but these are the 2 dominant parties. These are the ones who are leading the way. They're piping the tune. The president is going to be from one of these 2 parties. And in Congress, they have the biggest blocks of votes, so they're going to dictate the agenda. Of course, they'll have to make concessions to their coalition members, right? We talk about coalition politics. So if I'm Lula and I win the presidency, I've got to make sure that I give a portfolio to like the Green Party, give a portfolio to Podemos or something like that. Like you have to make sure your alliance partners are happy and feel like they have a seat at the table. But you're really calling the tune. They can affect policy around the edges there and carve out little things that they want that are important to them. But that's really the limit of it there. And really, one of the interesting things is big business, Brazilian big business, because they're very much kind of, I guess I would say, caught in the middle. They're very much caught in the middle here, because big business in any country, especially a country like Brazil, where it's really big business. Brazil is a member of the BRICS club. I don't know, have I mentioned BRICS to you guys? BRICS. I'll come back to BRICS in a second. I'm gonna write it here so I don't forget. Big business here. I'm gonna put big business up here because it runs the country just like all countries. Big business. Okay. There we go. I'm only half joking. They want stability. They want stability. They have seen that the PT is not dangerous. They're not going to ruin the economy with high taxation and expropriation. You know, there's going to be some inefficiency, but that's true of every country. They're not really going to mess with big business and what they have going on. And of course, the LP, they want to give them some tax cuts and, privatize some industry here. So big business is very fine with either party. We've seen them work with the PT. We've seen them work with the LP. What they really don't want to see happen is political instability. Because you know what happens when there's political instability in a country? All that foreign direct investment stops. You can't be sure of what's going to happen to your money. And so, even though they had done just fine under Bolsonaro, when he started challenging the election and saying, I think it might have been fraudulent, they were like, forget it, dude. Lula won. You know what I mean? So big business, has a lot of power. The military has a lot of power as well, and they're really interested in political stability. But there is a lot of polarization. You think about these kind of dynamics. Doesn't this remind you of Republicans and Democrats in the United States, and just how polarized the politics have become there over these issues and these questions? So that's essentially what the breakdown is here. Does anyone have any questions about this before I talk about BRICS for a couple minutes? Okay, so BRICS is a club of countries who are it was formed 25 years ago or something like that. I'm not an expert on BRICS, but basically it was an economic club that was meant to provide alternative frameworks and talking shops outside of Western dominated control. Because if you think about the G8, the G20 and all that stuff, these are clubs that are dominated by the United States and its allies. And they pipe the tune, you march along if you want to come. Well, there wasn't really a place where you could get together and talk and set up arrangements outside of that. And so some of the biggest emerging economies got together and formed a club. And it's been called BRICS after their initials. You had Brazil, you had Russia, you had India, you had China, and you had South Africa. I'm just going to put a dot there and write Africa. Okay? So Brazil is one of these members. They're a big time player. They're a huge economy. Got tons of population. It's the largest state in Latin America. It's an important country. BRICS has actually expanded. They started taking in new members. And the idea here is to be able to form talking shops. And because what do I mean by talking shop? Maybe that's not obvious. So I know what I mean when I say talking shop. I was just doing an interview today where I was talking about the GATT, which turned into the WTO. So if you want to put together a global economy, you have to have arrangements between governments, right? But if we all have to go talk to each other individually, like okay, first, Connor, you and I work out what we want to do, and then we'll each go talk to someone else, but keep in mind what we decided, and then I'll talk to you, and you talk to him, and then not efficient, very difficult. Better if we can all just kind of get together periodically and talk about, what would be good for you, what would you guys be okay with, we talk about it, maybe we come to some agreements, maybe we don't, but that's basically what it is. And so there was this thing called the GATT, it was the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. It was started in 1948, and the United States was at the head of it, and it was just a talking shop. They'd get together every year and talk about, how trade was going. And eventually, it firmed up enough, the relationships grew solid enough that it transformed into the World Trade Organization in the 1990s. That's what that came from. So that's what BRICS was designed to be. It was designed to be a talking shop for these powers that didn't particularly like the United States, frankly. Brazil, there's a very intense anti-American strain in Brazilian politics on the left, because of course, who was kind of giving the generals the kind of, you should go ahead and just step in there, It was America, right? And Latin American leftists generally hate the United States because they were the ones who encouraged the coup in Chile, they were the ones who encouraged the coup in Argentina, they were the ones who encouraged the coup in Brazil, and I don't need to go through all the different countries. But then these countries would engage in horrible human rights abuses, and Washington would just be like, no, we love those guys because they hate communists. So the left in Latin America just does not have very strong pro-Washington feelings for historical reasons. So Brazil, Russia, anti-American feelings for obvious reasons. India, always thought of itself as that third way, right? I don't want to be part of your Cold War blocks. I'm going my own way. China, again, obvious reasons. South Africa, less obvious. South Africa didn't have like really vociferous anti-American feelings, but they were a major economy, and they joined up. Although over the last several years, relations between the United States and South Africa have taken a turn. But anyway, so that's BRICS. That's BRICS. It's added more members since then. I believe Saudi Arabia wants to join, and a couple others. But anyway, that's BRICS. Brazil is one of its biggest members. There you go. Has everyone gotten a chance to look this over? So if you can just kind of hold this picture in your mind here. I'm going to bring Brazil back up. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something horrible. I'm going to draw it. I'm going to draw it out here. Let me see. Okay. All right, Brazil. Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay. That's basically exactly what Brazil looks like. Okay. Phenomenal artistic abilities. I'm going to grab a different color marker here so I can give you a time here. So if you want to think of it here, here's our wonderful coastal population centers. And these black equals PT. PT equals the black marker. PT equals black marker. And here's the ocean. This is the ocean right here. So Atlantic, bless you. Atlantic Ocean right here. That's the PT strongholds. And then the LP strongholds, blue marker. Could be in the interior, right? And that's not to say that there can't be little strongholds of like, maybe there's a city here or there in this province that's like, got a nice urban concentration of population that like, okay, that little area might go PT and maybe that little area go PT. I'm not actually saying these are the areas because that's like the middle of the rainforest, so. But just to show you, and like there's a really poor area up here, but Bolsonaro was able to make inroads there by saying, look, I won't cut the Bolsa Familia, I won't cut that welfare program you all love, and look, I am a fellow Christian like you, and those godless commies down there just want to have a bunch of guys kissing each other doing drugs and letting the criminals run free. Is that what you want? I don't want that. Making inroads there, right? Bolsonaro was able to make some inroads up here. And this is historically one of the poorest regions of Brazil, this northeastern area here. This is actually where Lula came from. Lula da Silva, when he was just a little kid, they basically, it's so horribly poor up there. They basically like rode down on the back of a truck, and that's how they wound up in the slums down there. That's where he came from. So it's a very very desperate place, and it was interesting in the last election, Lula was able to make some inroads there on the basis of like what we would call cultural issues, right? We're used to that, right? There's a register that Donald Trump wants to use when he's talking to the evangelical crowd, and there's a register he wants to use when he's talking to the World Economic Forum people, right? He doesn't talk the same way. Politicians don't do that. They're catering to their audience, and so it's interesting there. But generally speaking, you're very safe if you look at urban-rural divides. In the United States, you can almost with 100% certainty guess which way a certain district is going to go just by looking at population density. The same thing is generally true in Brazil and in a lot of other countries. You have that really intense cultural divide between urban and rural communities, which of course is signified by population density. So there you are. Any questions about any of that? Well, then I shall erase that and fire up the PowerPoint again. Which one is the eraser? There we go. All right, let's erase all of this. What a masterpiece the world is losing. It's all right, it's preserved forever right there. There we go. sip of something there. There's got to be a better way to do that. Like, shouldn't there be like some kind of lever that just like pulls something down and just erases the whole thing at once? Why isn't that a thing? Okay. So, 1988, democracy reborn. The process starts in 84-85. 84-85, but the process is fully opened up in 89, 1989. And they get a new constitution. New constitution. I just want to talk about this new constitution here, because I said if you look at classically liberal 19th century constitutions, or like America's Constitution, which was actually written in the 18th century, this is Brazil's 7th, by the way. But Brazil's constitution, I want to talk about this because like a lot of modern constitutions that are written, in the last 25, 30 years, it includes a lot of really interesting things that you won't find anywhere in our constitution, for example. For example, it has things like economic rights. Like right in the Constitution, it guarantees a 40-hour work week, medical and retirement plans, minimum wages, a 12% interest ceiling on loans. It guarantees the right to strike. It guarantees environmental protections, Native American rights. That's a little different than what we're used to, right? We kind of think of the Constitution as being like, there shall be 2 houses, and the houses shall have elections of this many people this year and this one. No, these constitutions of a more modern bent kind of merge constitutional theory with what we generally take to be like legislative issues, right? Like, what kind of environmental protections there would be? We kind of think of that as being like, like something the legislature, once they're elected, then the legislature will debate. But so that's very interesting. So there's a real blending in newer constitutions between constitution writing and statute writing, and you see a lot of stuff in the constitutions there that you just don't see in older constitutions. But minimum voting age 16 under the new one. Brazil. So let me just write a few things down here. So the new constitution, 88, 89. New constitution. I'm just going to write down some random facts for you here. Voting age 16. What do you guys think of that? Voting age 16. You're shaking your head no.
You're just probably mooching off your parents' opinions at that point. I mean,
How about 18?
even 18.
How about 14?
Nah, that's wise.
Okay. I'm just saying, like, where is it, like, we're all like, that's
Absolutely
unacceptable.
not.
Okay, so 14, does anyone think 14 is cool? I don't care if you do.
But you can't even drive.
Who's
Who's gonna take you to the polls, your mother?
Okay, so 14 is too young. 15?
No.
16?
No.
Okay, so that's what it is in Brazil. It's 16. It's 16.
No.
So, so the voting age is 16. Remember, we're dealing with a federal structure, a federal state. Remember, this is in contrast to a unitary state. Remember, we talked about the French and the English systems, which are highly unitary, meaning that power is all coming out from the center. Federal states like Germany, like Brazil, like the United States, that's where a lot of the power, the police power, the power of education, all of those things are in the hands of the states. So Brazil, also a federal state, is a presidential system. And it has, as we've already seen, a bicameral legislature. And it is multi-party. Just a few random facts right up there as I keep talking here. Very powerful presidency. As we said, this is generally the case in Latin America. Now, originally, they had said, let's just have one term limit. But they changed it in the mid-90s to 2. So now you can do 2 4-year terms, and then you can return to run for office after an interval out of power. This is how Lula was able to come back. So if you remember, Lula gets elected, gets reelected, his successor gets elected in her own right, then she gets impeached and he gets locked up and Bolsonaro wins, and then Lula gets out of prison and then he wins. So, the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house, each person is elected to 4-year terms based on proportional representation. So proportional representation here. Proportional representation, let's see. Multi-party with proportional representation. Alright. Those are all our cool facts. So that's its current constitution, the voting age, it's a federal, state, presidential system, bicameral legislature, multi-party, proportional representation. Okay, cool. Okay. So this is the same kind of one that we had seen in Japan, by the way. So it's open list proportional representation. So basically, oh no, I forgot. Oh, cool. It didn't make me type my password back in. Cool. Which is great because my password is like the original one that I got when I was an undergraduate here, and so it's like a bazillion letters and numbers, and I never changed it. So anytime I don't touch the computer for a while, it like switches off and then I have to type my password back in.
You remember the whole thing, or is it just saved?
It's just written down in my planner. No, I still can't remember that. I've had that same password for about 20 years. It's like tons of, it's like W, capital K, question mark, apostrophe. I'm told that it will take a very powerful hacker algorithm 10,000 years to crack it, and I probably will be dead by then. Okay, so, yes. Let's see what else we want to talk about here. Let's talk about, okay, so these are the 2 chambers we looked at. These are all the different parties. And now this is just I have this up here so you can see just kind of how it breaks down. These are the percentage of seats they control in the federal assemblies. So there's tons of them because each state has one, right? We've got all the federal states, and this is what it looks like at the national level. When we look at the actual institutions here, it's pretty straightforward. Now, I like to use these types of diagrams to show you these things. So I'm going to step over here. If my laser pointer will, I don't know. Let's see. Okay, so obviously the voters directly elect the president. Okay, so the voters directly elect. The voters also elect their state and local governments. Voters also directly elect their representatives in the Chamber of Deputies and directly elect their senators. So this all is very familiar to us because we live in a federal structure ourselves. So they have a lot of the same things going on here. The president names their cabinet, right? And then those cabinet members run the various ministries. And the ministries, of course, consist of the bureaucracies. You have your Supreme Court. The nomination process and the confirmation process are, again, borrowed essentially straight up from the United States, just as there is the cabinet selection process. You have to get them approved by the Senate. This happened just recently. Did anyone follow? They call it Senate confirmation hearings. Did anyone follow those, or do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. If you don't, it basically means the president says, this is my guy, Jim Bob. Jim Bob is an ace with economics, so he's going to run the Treasury Department. And so then the Senate takes a look at Jim Bob and says, well, Jim Bob seems like he knows what he's doing. We'll approve his cabinet position. Or something happens, and the president says, "This is my buddy Zach. He's gonna be our attorney general. He's got some outstanding legal issues, but I assure you that he's a top right character, all false." The Senate says, "I don't think so." And then the candidate will be withdrawn, and then he'll put someone else forward. So it's all very familiar. If you follow U.S. politics, it's basically the exact same. So, the Supreme Court, it has 11 members, lifetime term, another lifetime court. And then the president will nominate them, and the Senate will confirm them. So, again, if you know American politics, the Brazilian system, if you're sitting, sometimes, because I follow a lot of different politics around the world, I'll have to kind of like Google real quick and be like, okay, so how does this system work? Brazil's system is exactly like ours, basically. So there's no issue in terms of following what's going on and what the mechanics are. So, and of course, I mentioned last time one of the kind of dangers is when the branches start to kind of seem in the case of the court, for example, the legitimacy of the court needs to be seen as a neutral arbiter, right? A neutral arbiter among the policy, among the parties, among the other branches of government. And one of the things that's very dangerous is when the judiciary starts to be perceived as partisan. This is a problem in the United States. This is a problem in Germany. This is a problem in Brazil. As I think I mentioned, because you've had the courts locking up or trying to lock up the other party's candidates for president. Whether or not the charges had basis or not, we talked about the fact that there are procedural questions and there are material questions. If there's actual material wrongdoing, I think it's unquestionable that a person should be locked up. But when they start using procedural things to lock people up, that's very, very dangerous. Issues in contemporary Brazil. Let's jump into these. Because this is the system. Let me jump back. Does anyone have any questions about Brazil's political institutions? Okay. Let's talk about some of the issues in contemporary Brazil then. Political instability. It's a young democracy. Brazil's democracy was extremely unstable, right? We had these very fortunately bloodless, largely, transitions of power as we moved from Portuguese colony to dual monarchy to independent Brazilian empire to old republic, and then to the first round of military dictatorship in the 20s and then the 30s. It's been highly unstable. This current round of democracy, this current system has been in place essentially, if you want to mark like the 1990s as the beginning of like fully participatory democratic politics under the new constitution, I think you're very safe to do that. But that means that this democracy is about my age, not old. And so a lot of political instability. Brazil's Supreme Court has ruled that former President Jair Bolsonaro must stand trial over allegations of a coup attempt to overturn the 2022 election results in which he lost narrowly to Luiz Lula da Silva. The court's decision has also grouped in several of Bolsonaro's allies. I mentioned to you that some of his guys had communicated to members of the military saying, "Hey, what do you guys think of this?" Allegedly. Allegedly. That's what they're saying. But that's what the court is going to find out. They're going to look into these material facts. This is a highly unstable situation, though, because Lula won 51 to 49. That's narrow. It's really narrow. So, and of course, I had mentioned that Bolsonaro had challenged the election prior to that, claiming fraud. And actually, I didn't realize this, but going all the way back to 2014, they had been claiming that there were irregularities in PT dominated voting districts. If you think about our own situation, in the next presidential election, is Detroit going to go Democrat or Republican? Bet your house on it right now. I will. It's going to go Democrat.
It's gonna flip.
It's going to go Democrat. I will bet my house on it, 100%. And that's the thing is, you have this one-party control of this area, and you want to win, right? It's dangerous if the other guy wins, and so maybe a few extra ballots. Fine, I don't know. I don't know where you got. I don't know. Don't ask questions about that. Probably there's some irregularities. As I said, there's usually going to be some irregularities in voting, but the important thing with democracy is that teams continue to play the game and honor the results. So that's not happening at this point. And I didn't realize that had started going back almost a decade ago. Persistent inflation and economic challenges. Brazil is facing a lot of price pressures. Things like essential commodities. You all know. Well, maybe you don't know. Do you guys go grocery shopping and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, have you been doing it for like 4 or 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you know that eggs used to be like $2, and now if you buy them, you can't come to school anymore. Right? You can't afford gas for the car to come. Yes, and this is huge because especially in an economy where a large number of people are exceedingly poor. Remember that number I hit you with? Over 30 million people suffering from severe food insecurity. A large portion of your income is going into basic foodstuffs. And so if the price of food starts rising a lot, it's going to put a real strain on you. Inflation, like all central banks, they set an inflation target. The Brazilian central bank's inflation target is 3%. It has healthily exceeded that each year for several years running. It's better than the 1990s though, where inflation hit like 500%. So they're doing a much better job than they used to. High public debt and fiscal deficits. So this is a difficult thing for developing economies here because the PT wants to be able to spend money on social programs. The problem is you are not generating enough revenue and enough economic growth to expand the size of these programs without borrowing a lot of money. Basically, Brazil's economic growth back in the 90s and early 2000s, they were hitting 5, 7, 8%. I think they hit 10% a couple times. Year-on-year GDP growth. Incredible, phenomenal numbers, right? Over the last decade, it's averaged like 1.5% per year. That's not good. That's terrible, actually. They're a developing economy. 5% should be pretty easy to do. And there are a lot of reasons that it's not working, and part of it is very, very cumbersome business environment. I've heard this from several people, and I read the business press all the time. It's a very difficult business environment, labyrinthine regulations, a very complex tax code. This is one of the reasons that Jair Bolsonaro and his supporters on the right want to simply strip down the tax code, eliminate a bunch of the regulations so that businesses can just start doing productive activities, because that's what's going to grow your economy. There are only two sectors of the economy, the private sector and the public sector, right? And the private sector is where you have the discipline of the profit and loss mechanism, which is going to generate the most of your profit. We talked about state-owned oil companies and how incredibly inefficient they are compared to their privately run counterparts. Petrobras is no different. So they'd like to privatize that and simply tax it. Instead of having the state directly run it and do a generally terrible job, they would rather just privatize it and get a tax cut of the increased output that the more streamlined operation could produce. Public debt. Huge increases during the period of COVID, of course, that happened everywhere. Social inequality and poverty. Brazil is one of the most unequal countries globally. It has been going all the way back. If we go back to think about how Brazil was set up under the Portuguese colonies, it was, again, I think it's helpful to think about the Spanish and Portuguese systems together opposed to how things were set up in British North America. British North America had lots of individual little small farming, that's small farming put together, smarming. Small farming communities and families. It was lots of different property owners, lots of small communities and small businesses setting up, lots of land, lots of small individual landowners. That is not what happened in the Spanish colonies or in the Portuguese Brazilian possessions either. What happened is you had one large plantation landowner, and then they basically just had these few here, right? This is not something that's going to diffuse wealth across a broad middle class quickly. The American middle class, if you go back and Okay, the American Revolution's about to start. Oh wow, America basically already has like a thriving entrepreneurial, commercial, land-owning business class. Oh wow, that's perfect. Brazil didn't have that. Brazil really never had that. When we think back to all the different stages that I took you through of Brazilian political development, at no point did you have a robust, thriving commercial middle class that was growing out the size of the economy. No, you had essentially the vast amount of poor people, and then you had the small handful of rich people with very, very little in between. And the middle class has grown out a little bit, right? It's growing out, but the concentration of wealth continues to be predominantly at the top. He gives you statistics in the book, and you can look up modern statistics. It's the Gini coefficient, Gini, if you want to take a look at it. That is the indication of the amount of wealth disparity in the country. Yes, social inequality and poverty. Brazil, one of the most unequal countries globally, 2025. Poverty rate, 20%. That is crazy. That's a crazy number. Especially when we're talking about the poverty rate in an emerging country. Like by our standards, by the standards of our own poverty rate, I mean like 70-80% of them are living in poverty. The wealthiest 5% of the population basically are earning as much as the bottom 95% combined. This is not a highly diversified, broad-based system here. Environmental degradation and deforestation. This is a real hot button topic because the Amazon is, well, it's part of Brazil, but it's also very important to the global ecosystem as well. It sucks a lot of the carbon out of the air, produces a lot of the oxygen, has a lot of the world's biodiversity. Deforestation of the Amazon has decreased. It's received a lot of protections, especially under the PT. The region, basically, there's a lot of agribusiness, like large-scale agribusiness that wants to move into those regions. You basically need lots of pasture land to raise beef and stuff like that. Brazil produces a ton of really good high-grade beef. And then there's like illegal logging that goes on there as well. It's very valuable. And it's hard to like put a stop to, because just think about the map here. Just think about how big it's hard to even get a look at it. Look how big Brazil is. Like just imagine Brazil smacked over the United States, right? And this is like just the densest, most impenetrable rainforest here, right? And there's like some illegal logging going on in there. Like it's very difficult to put a stop to it. Yeah.
Like, how do you go about, like, how do people there go about, like, logging legally? Like, do they even allow
permits and
that?
stuff. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is there, like, I'm assuming there's, like, some sort of limit, though, or something?
There is. I believe it's 80%. 80% of the Amazon basin, I believe is what they call it, the Amazon basin, which is where the rainforest is located, has to remain in its untouched state. But up to 20%, it's either 20% or 15%, I can't remember which, is allowed to be developed. But there are rules governing what you can do and how within that 15 or 20%. So, yeah. So that's basically what's going on there. I'll jump back here. And then there's the biggest one. Like I said, if you look at public polls, and of course, like all democratic countries, you go about and you ask people around election time, what's your biggest issue? Rank your priorities. What are the things that matter most to you? Corruption regularly wins. Corruption regularly tops everything, including concerns about the economy. Because Brazilians rightly perceive that if there were less corruption and better governance, the economy would start growing faster and better. If you didn't have so many predatory practices going on, so much corruption going on, so much crime going on. So corruption, crime, and governance issues. I mean, it's endemic. It is absolutely endemic. At every level, like I said, from the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, bribery and corruption is just everywhere. And it's intermixed with like organized crime and big business and stuff like that. So it's a huge nightmare. Independent journalists and civil society activists risk harassment, violent attack, political violence, and this is something too where you also have to be careful not to like if you're like a civil rights activist or something or something, you have to be careful not to like be filming the police doing something either, because like they'll turn around and just hit you over the head with a club. You know what I mean? Like you gotta be careful. Like they don't mess around at all. the police are as likely to, shake you down than help you. We talked about the low level of trust that the Mexican society has for the police because they understand that they are corrupt and often involved in these negative activities and are, prone to, abuses of power. The same thing is true in Brazil, especially in the cities, and even more so in the favelas, which are the slums that surround those major cities. Obviously, Brazil has a lot of issues. It is a developing country. There's still plenty of room for development. Brazil faces some very interesting challenges. I actually was doing some work on this a few years ago, and I learned some interesting stuff. For example, it's very hot, and very humid down in Brazil. So much so that the asphalt we use for roads around here, that tends to melt and drain off the side there, right? And so just thinking about the kind of challenges to just laying down roads, you can't just do it like you do it here. The incredible amounts of forests that and mountains and rivers and stuff. It's a huge. And then there's all these different indigenous groups. There's still something like 90 different tribal groups all over the place who have their protected lands. It's a real challenge there in terms of just doing this. And then on top of that, you have all of the really complex regulatory and tax frameworks, and the fact that you're also going to have to pay bribes to speed the process along and make sure that it doesn't get held up. And you also have to worry about, well, what's going to happen if legal proceedings are initiated against you. You can't be sure that the rule of law is going to protect you there. So those are the big things that are holding Brazil back. If crime and corruption and governance issues could be solved, which I know that's asking a lot there, well then, at least in theory, things like social inequality and poverty would be eliminated by the vast amounts of economic growth that happen, and high public debt and fiscal deficits would also be theoretically eliminated as the economy started growing larger and larger, right? Because the government wouldn't need to make as many welfare payments, and the size of the tax base would be growing. So theoretically, the elimination, the solving of number 6 there, cutting down on bad governance and corruption, that would be very, very helpful, because it would really help address a lot of these other things. Environmental degradation and deforestation, those are really policy questions. Those don't really have anything to do with crime and corruption and stuff. There is obviously a little bit of kickback money going on there. We're going to conduct some illegal logging, so we're going to pay you local officials to just ignore it, etc. But generally speaking, I think those other things could all really be addressed by better governance and the elimination of corruption, which is of course very difficult, especially when it gets tied into contests for the highest office in the land, political power. In terms of crime, yes, violent crime and kidnapping, yes, it's very typical. In fact, the wealthy, as I drew the pyramid up here, the super wealthy, they tend to go around in armored cars with armed bodyguards, or fly helicopters in and out of the city. Being robbed or kidnapped for extortion money, to be ransomed, that's not an uncommon problem there. Obviously, when we talked about this with Mexico, a lot of the crime is fostered by, number one, lack of economic opportunities and things of that nature, and also by the fact that there's money to be made in the lucrative drug trade. But as the police militarize war against the drug trade, the narco traffickers generally tend to just buy more and better guns. So similar situation there. But there's very little support among the broad majority of Brazilians, who I said are very culturally conservative. They're not really interested in legalization. That's something that you'll find among university graduate types who are let's just let people decide what they want to do there, and that'll allow other entrants to come in, and it'll remove the black market monopoly, and prices will come down, and it won't be profitable, and which again is all well and good to explain in sort of here's my supply and demand chart, and you can see how this will happen here. But politics is about people, right? And people have have lots of different priorities that are in conflict with each other, and so it can be difficult. And again, Bolsonaro's strategy is just to go harder. just to go harder at these guys. And so, you know, we saw how that happened in Mexico, how it was the effort to militarize the fight against the drug traffic that led to the rise of these insanely powerful cartels who now, you know, I don't know. I've heard Republicans talk about like sending the Marines into like northern Mexico and stuff. Hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, so that's Brazil. Any questions about Brazil? It's a cool country. Next week, we're going to do Nigeria. And then the week after that is sort of our freebie week, where I'm going to talk about all sorts of different things that we haven't talked about yet. I'm definitely going to do the Gulf monarchies. I'm going to see if there's any, like maybe the Swiss system as well, and then just a bunch of like the sort of bolded terms that are in the glossary that I just think are important. I'll probably just go over a handful of those. So next week, Nigeria. The quiz is up for Brazil. If you need anything, please email me. And if you're driving, please drive safe. Sounds like the rain has started. Okay. Have a wonderful week, everyone.